"Sign it, Vivian." That was all he said. No explanation, no apology. Just those 3 words, dropped onto the kitchen table like the manila envelope he'd slid across the wood, the one with the return address from a family law firm downtown. My sister had been buried 4 days ago. I still had dirt on the heels of my boots from standing at the graveside. I still had the sympathy card from her neighbors sitting on the counter, unopened. And my husband, the man I had loved for 7 years, the man who had given a eulogy at my sister's funeral and cried real tears in front of everyone, was standing in our kitchen asking me to sign divorce papers. "What is this?" I asked. Even though I already knew, I needed to hear him say it out loud. He didn't sit down. He kept his hands in his pockets, the way he always did when he'd already decided something and didn't want a discussion about it. "I think we've grown apart," he said. "I think it's better for both of us." "Grown apart," I repeated. He nodded. Once, I looked at the envelope, then I looked at him. And something in me, some last fragile thread of hope that I'd been holding onto since I started noticing the late nights and the deleted texts 6 months ago, just went quiet. Not broke, just went very, very still. "Is it Diane?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. Diane was my older sister. Or she had been. She was gone now. A stroke at 39, no warning, no goodbye, just a phone call from her neighbor at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday saying she'd been found unconscious. She never woke up. We buried her the Saturday before last. And now her husband, my husband, was standing here asking me to sign papers so he could be with her. "She's grieving," I said. My voice sounded strange, far away. "She just lost her husband 3 months ago. You know that. You were at the funeral." "This isn't about grief," he said. "Then what is it about?" He looked at the window instead of at me. My sister's husband, my brother-in-law Nathan, had died of a heart attack in February. He was 41. He ran every morning, ate clean, had a physical every year. None of it mattered. He was here, and then he wasn't. Diane had been devastated. We all had. I had driven to her house 3 times a week for 2 months, sitting with her while she cried, bringing food, handling the things she couldn't handle, the life insurance paperwork, the bank accounts, the storage unit full of Nathan's clothes she wasn't ready to touch. And apparently at some point during all of that, my husband had decided he was in love with her. I found out later, much later, that it had started before Nathan even died. Long before. But I didn't know that yet. Standing in the kitchen, all I knew was that my sister was dead. My marriage was ending, and the man across the table from me didn't have the decency to look me in the eye while he ended it. I picked up the pen. I signed my name. He looked surprised, I think. He'd expected a fight. I didn't have one left in me. I was 31 years old. I had just buried my only sibling, and I was completely, utterly empty. "You can leave tonight," I said. "I'll have your things in boxes by Friday." He opened his mouth. "Tonight," I said again. He left. My sister and I had not been close as children. That probably sounds terrible, but it's true. Diane was 8 years older, a different generation in the same house. By the time I was 12, she was in college. By the time I was old enough to really know her, she had her own life, her own apartment, her own orbit entirely. We were polite at holidays. We called each other on birthdays. It wasn't until Nathan got sick, the first time, a cancer scare when he was 36, that something shifted between us. I was 27, newly married, and I drove to her house on a Thursday night with takeout and sat on her kitchen floor while she cried for 2 hours. I didn't say anything useful. I just stayed. And after that, we stayed. She used to call me on her lunch breaks. She'd tell me about the clients at her firm, the ones who drove her crazy, the ones she genuinely liked. I'd tell her about the school where I taught, the kids, the parents, the politics of a 5th grade hallway. We'd talk for 40 minutes and hang up still in the middle of sentences. She was my best friend by the time she died. That's the thing that kills me most. My husband. My ex-husband, I should say. I'm going to call him Derek because that's his name and he no longer deserves a softer label. Moved in with Diane's house within 2 weeks of her funeral. I know this because my neighbor Greta drives past Diane's old street on her way to the grocery store. She texted me a photo without saying anything. Just a photo of Derek's car in Diane's driveway at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday. He was wearing Nathan's coat. I recognized it immediately. A gray wool coat, the kind with the tortoiseshell buttons that Nathan had worn to every family dinner for the past 5 years. Diane had bought it for him. She'd showed it to me on her phone before she wrapped it, excited, a little nervous, the way she always got when she'd spent more than she planned. Derek was wearing Nathan's coat and going into Nathan's house and sleeping in Nathan's bed. I threw up after I saw that photo. I'm not ashamed to admit it. What nobody around me fully understood, what I could barely articulate to myself, was that I wasn't only grieving my marriage. I was grieving my sister twice. Once because she was dead, once because of what I was learning about her. I found things after Derek left, not intentionally. I was looking for a charger I thought I'd left in his nightstand, and I found a stack of printed emails in an envelope taped to the back of the drawer. I sat on the bedroom floor and read them for an hour. They had started 2 years ago. Long, detailed emails, the kind Derek had never once sent me, not in 7 years. He talked about her laugh. She talked about feeling understood for the first time in years. He said he thought about her every day. She said she was sorry, but she didn't know how to stop. There were 36 of them. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point I realized the light had changed and it was dark outside and I was still on the floor holding the last email. I put them back. I taped the envelope back to the drawer. And I made myself a decision right then. Sitting in the dark, I was not going to collapse. I was not going to let this take me under. I had already lost my sister. I was not going to lose myself too. Derek and Diane. I couldn't stop thinking about how they sounded together. Derek and Diane, like a bad episode of something. Like people who ended up on daytime television. The thing about Diane's estate was that nobody in Derek's orbit had fully thought it through. Nathan had been meticulous about their finances. He was an estate attorney, and yes, I understand the irony there. Deeply. And he had planned everything precisely because that's what he did for other people for a living. He knew better than anyone what happened to families when the paperwork wasn't in order. Nathan had a will. Of course he did. He'd had one since they got married. He updated it after his cancer scare, updated it again when they bought the house. The estate went to Diane entirely when he died. The house, his retirement accounts, his life insurance, the investment portfolio he'd been quietly building for 15 years. Diane, however, had not updated her own will in a very long time. She had made one years ago, before Nathan, before the house, before any of it. A basic document she put together when she was 26 and felt like a responsible adult for about a week. In that will, she had left everything to our mother, who had died 5 years before Diane did. And when a beneficiary predeceases you and you haven't updated the paperwork, in the state where we live, the estate passes by the terms of intestacy law. I knew all of this because I had spent 3 weeks reading every legal document I could find after Nathan died, helping Diane organize everything. I had sat at her kitchen table and gone through it all with her, and I had said, gently, "Diane, you need to update your will." She'd nodded. She'd said she'd call someone that week. She never did. After she died, I contacted the county probate court to understand what the intestacy process would look like. And the answer, because Diane and I were the only immediate family left, our parents both gone, no children, was that under our state's laws, I was next of kin, not a spouse. She and Derek were never married. They'd been together 7 years, but they had never filed a marriage license, never made it official. In the eyes of the law, Derek had no claim. Everything Diane had. The house Nathan built, the savings they'd accumulated together, the investments went to me. I did not know this on the day Derek moved into that house. I found out slowly through the probate process, through calls with the court-appointed administrator, and eventually with an estate attorney I hired on my own. It took months. The process is never fast. But Derek didn't know either. And here is where it gets interesting. Derek had quit his job. I found this out from a former coworker of his who had once been a mutual friend and still felt guilty enough about the whole situation to occasionally pass things along. Derek had left his position at the architecture firm, a good position, a stable one, and what I can only describe as a confidence move. He'd moved into Diane's house, told people he was transitioning, and let the impression form on its own that he was about to be a man of substantial means. He was not working. He was living off Diane's cash accounts, joint accounts she'd had with Nathan that transferred to her, then to her estate, while the probate process ground forward. And in his mind, I imagine, he was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm what he believed was already his. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. When the estate attorney's letter arrived, the formal one, the one that explained the intestacy determination and named me as the sole heir, Derek apparently called 3 different lawyers in the same afternoon. I know this because one of them was a friend of my college roommate, and she heard enough of the conversation to piece together what was happening. He had no case, no legal standing whatsoever. He had not been listed in any will. He had not been married to Diane. He had contributed nothing to the estate. He had simply moved into a house he assumed was his and waited. The house was not his. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with grief when it's tangled up with betrayal. It's not the clean exhaustion of loss, the kind where you sleep for 12 hours and wake up feeling hollowed out but at least rested. It's a dirty, circular exhaustion, the kind where your brain keeps returning to the same images on a loop, and every time you think you've processed one thing, you find 3 more underneath it. I was teaching full-time through all of this. 5th grade, same classroom I've been in for 6 years. 22 10-year-olds who needed me present, engaged, functional. Some days that structure was the only thing holding me together. I had to get up. I had to get dressed. I had to walk in and act like a person. My co-teacher Lisa figured out something was wrong around week 3. She didn't push. She just started showing up with coffee every morning and leaving me alone during lunch, and that act of quiet consideration undid me more than once in the supply closet. My mother's youngest sister, my Aunt Bev, drove up from Savannah when she heard. She stayed for 2 weeks sleeping on the couch, making soup I didn't ask for, watching old movies with me on nights when I couldn't sleep. She didn't tell me to look on the bright side. She didn't tell me Diane would have wanted me to be happy. She just said, "This is awful and you're allowed to think it's awful." I needed someone to say that more than I'd realized. The probate attorney. Her name was Sandra Chen, and I will recommend her to anyone who asks for the rest of my life. Walked me through the process with a patience and precision I can't adequately describe. She explained that the timeline would be long, that Derek's inquiries through his own lawyers would create some friction, but not a real obstacle. That I should expect it to take the better part of a year before anything was fully settled. What you need to do, she told me, is be patient and document everything. I documented everything. I kept every email, every letter from the court, every record of the accounts, the property tax assessments, the value of the investment portfolio. Sandra advised me early on that I would eventually need to decide what to do with the house, sell it, rent it out, or live in it myself. She suggested I not make that decision quickly. I didn't. What I did decide quickly was that I was done being invisible. I'd been invisible in my marriage without knowing it. I'd been invisible in my grief, trying to stay steady for everyone around me. I was done with that. I started running again, something I'd abandoned years ago because Derek had called it pointless. I signed up for a half marathon in October and trained for it every single morning, 6 days a week, before school. I applied for a master's program in educational leadership. I'd been putting off for 3 years because Derek had said the timing was never right. I got in. Derek, at some point, must have started to understand what the probate process was going to determine. His lawyer sent one letter attempting to argue that he had a common law interest in the estate due to his relationship with Diane. Sandra responded with a single paragraph explaining that the state does not recognize common law marriage and that his claim had no legal merit. She was very pleasant about it, apparently. She told me she always preferred to be pleasant. That was the last legal correspondence we received from him directly. What I heard through other channels. The quiet, well-meaning network of people who felt I deserved to know things. was that he had started looking for work again. That the money in Diane's joint accounts had run lower than he'd expected while probate ground forward. That he had said at some gathering I was not part of, that he felt he'd been misled about the situation. I want to be very clear, no one misled him. He simply assumed. He had looked at a house that wasn't his, a life that wasn't his, a future built on someone else's tragedy, and he had counted it as his own. And when it wasn't, he was shocked. The estate settled on a cold Thursday in late November, 11 months after Diane died. I sat in Sandra's office and signed documents for about 40 minutes. It was remarkably quiet. The building had good windows, the kind that keep out all the street noise, and the only sound was the pen on paper and Sandra occasionally telling me what I was signing and why. The house appraised at $412,000. Nathan's investment portfolio, accumulated steadily over 15 years and left to Diane, then to me, was worth slightly over $200,000. There were other accounts, smaller ones, and personal property, furniture, her car, the jewelry from their mother. I sat with all of it for a long time that afternoon. Then I drove to the house. I had a key. I'd had one since Nathan died, from when I was helping Diane organize everything. I let myself in and walked through the rooms slowly. Derek's things were already gone. He'd been told by Sandra's office that he needed to vacate and he had, without a fight, which told me he'd finally understood there was nothing left to fight for. It smelled like Diane's shampoo faintly in the hallway. She'd kept the same brand for 15 years. I stood in the kitchen, where she used to make coffee at 7 in the morning, while we talked on the phone, me in my car in the school parking lot, her with one foot on the cabinet because she always stood that way, and I let myself feel all of it. The loss, the love, the fury, and underneath all of it something quieter. She had not updated her will. She had not made things right. She had carried this secret for 2 years and taken it with her. I had loved her for the last years of her life more completely than I'd ever loved anyone, and she had not been honest with me. I had to hold all of that together, the grief and the anger and the love. They didn't cancel each other out. They just all lived in me at once, and I was learning to let them. I sold the house in the spring. I didn't want to live in it. I'd thought about it, genuinely. But every room would have been a room I was sharing with a ghost, and I didn't think that was fair to either of us. The buyers were a young couple, late 20s, first home, clearly nervous, smiling too much the way people do when they're trying not to seem like they want something this badly. I was glad. The house deserved that kind of energy. It deserved someone who would stay. I put the proceeds into a trust with Sandra's guidance, set up a donor-advised fund through my community foundation, made the first gift to the elementary school in our town that had the lowest per-pupil funding in the district. I'm not telling you that to make myself sound generous. I'm telling you because I needed to do something with it that Nathan would have respected. He cared about that kind of thing. He would have done something like that. I kept some of it, paid off my remaining student loans in one afternoon, which felt surreal and quietly wonderful, put the rest into a long-term account I don't intend to touch for 20 years. I finished the half marathon in October. 2 hours and 19 minutes. Lissa ran it with me. Aunt Bab drove up from Savannah and stood at the finish line in a bright yellow jacket, yelling my name from 100 feet out. I heard her before I saw her. I started the master's program in January. I'm in my second semester now. It's hard in the way that things are hard when they're worth doing. The kind of hard that makes you tired in a clean way, not the dirty, exhausted way of that first year. Derek moved out of the state, I heard, somewhere in the Midwest. A new job, someone said. A fresh start, someone else said, as though that were a simple thing you could simply go get. I don't spend much time thinking about him. I spent a long time thinking about Diane, about the version of her I loved and the version of her I didn't know, and about how both of those were real and both of them were her, and I didn't have to choose which one mattered. She was my sister. She made mistakes that hurt me in ways I'll be unraveling for years. She also loved me, I believe that, even when she was making those mistakes. Human beings are like that. Complicated and contradictory and capable of loving people they are also in the process of hurting. I'm trying to hold that without bitterness. Some days, I manage it better than others. What I know is this: I am still here. I ran 13 miles and am getting a master's degree. And I made the first gift to a school that needed it, and I have a co-teacher who brings me coffee and an aunt who drives 4 hours to stand at a finish line in a yellow jacket. I signed the papers on the worst day of my life and I kept going. That turned out to be enough. I thought a lot about what Derek actually believed when he walked out of our house that night. I think he genuinely thought he was making a smart move. That's the part that stays with me. Not the cruelty of it, but the confidence. He had looked at a life that wasn't his, done the math in his head, and concluded that he was about to come out ahead. That's not a love story. That's a calculation. And calculations that start from wrong assumptions don't get more accurate just because you're committed to them. What Derek never understood, what I don't think he was capable of understanding, is that what you build on someone else's loss was never yours to begin with. He moved into Nathan's house wearing Nathan's coat, and he waited for the paperwork to hand him a future he hadn't earned. The paperwork didn't cooperate. It never does when the foundation isn't real. I'm not saying this to be righteous about it. I made my own mistakes in those years. I stayed in a marriage longer than I should have because leaving felt like admitting failure, and I had confused endurance with loyalty. Those aren't the same thing. I know that now. Endurance without honesty is just a longer way of arriving at the same broken place. What I learned, not from Derek, but from the year after, is that the choices we make quietly, when nobody is watching, are the ones that actually define us. Diane made choices I'll never fully understand. I loved her, and she hurt me, and both of those things are permanently true. Derek made choices based on what he could take rather than what he could give. And I made a choice, on the floor of a dark bedroom holding 36 printed emails, to keep going anyway. That choice was mine. Nobody handed it to me. I didn't stumble into it. I made it deliberately, on a night when I had every reason not to. I think that's the only thing worth passing on from any of this. Not the inheritance, not the legal outcome, not the satisfaction of watching someone's bad plan unravel. Those things happened, and they mattered, but they're not the point. The point is what you do on the worst night, whether you get up the next morning, whether you apply to the program you've been postponing for 3 years, whether you lace up your shoes and run 13 miles toward something instead of sitting still inside your own grief. Vivian. Myself. I chose to keep going, and Sandra helped me protect what was rightfully mine, and Lysa showed up with coffee, and Aunt Bev drove 4 hours in a yellow jacket. None of that was luck. It was people being decent, which is its own kind of cause and effect. You treat people well for long enough, and the people who love you show up when you need them. Derek is somewhere in the Midwest now, starting over. I genuinely hope he figures it out. That's not performance. I just don't have the energy for the alternative. Anger is expensive, and I've got a master's degree to finish.